All
Hey.
right. Hello. Hi.
Oh my God, I'm so disheveled. Hi. Good to
Hi.
see you.
Good to
Florida.
see you. Thanks for joining again.
My pleasure. Round two, but this time in public.
Yeah, doing this again. Yeah, perfect timing. I was moving and the movers left 5 minutes ago. So it was a
Well, that's very good. It all worked
tight
out
one.
according to
So
plan. Hold on, I'm gonna turn a fan on. It's hot here. Is it hot there? Is it hot where you are?
no, it dropped. So
Dropped.
I've been moving about 2 months ago and it's the first time I have a huge balcony. And I
Oh,
put out a
yes.
bunch of plants and they just started dying. So yeah, winter's coming. Um,
I I like having plants around. I never water them.
Yeah, it's the first time. It's really nice. It's,
That's good.
I have to say, Corona stopped me from moving. I can actually, keep something alive for longer than, I don't know, a week. So it's quite
This
nice.
is what I should
No,
get into. I should get into
yeah,
planting things.
there's upsides now. I don't know, I know it's kind of morbid to say that, but I can have plants now.
Oh no, no, it's all right. You know, I keep thinking I'm gonna have a hobby in my life. Nothing ever seems to click.
But I think that's the thing with people in the arts. There's no life-work balance. Like whenever friends outside talk about it, I was like, what is that? What do you mean? Like, you have other things to do in your life. I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah,
But
it's weird. It is odd. We could talk about that. That's an interesting one.
yeah.
All my friends are artists. It's kind of annoying because at some point when I started becoming professional, I was like, are people kind of hitting me up for jobs? I can't tell.
Well, the thing is, I went to a dinner party at my friend's house, and she's not in the arts, and none of her friends are, and I didn't know anybody. And usually you're like, so what did you see last? Or who are
Yeah,
you thinking with at the moment? And I don't know, it was very weird to have like nothing to talk for the first 5 minutes. And I was like, oh yeah, the weather and
I know.
the
The common ground
plants.
is really useless. I got no common ground. When people are like, let's talk about music, my bands are from like 1993. I'm like, I don't know. I haven't really kept up.
It's kind of
Movies.
sad, but it's kind of also amazing because all of your friends get along because they all know, you're in the same field and it's very nice. And I guess it's both.
I was at a family event last night. There's a few Trumpers in the family.
Ooh, that's a weird one. What did
I
you
came to
do?
this opinion. There are many people whose politics, they don't think that hard about them. It's not like it's kind of
Well,
like a light sweater they put on. They're just like, I don't know, I'm Trump.
I kind of like when it's in your family in the sense of then you know who they are and you can talk to them and you
Yeah,
can actively change your mind because you have common ground. Like they're not. I mean, hopefully, that they're not completely crazy. Like you can have that conversation, just ask why. And I think, to me as a European, it's really hard to understand that. I mean, we have similar phenomena here. Like my granddad is totally, right wing crazy, and I just ask him very politely because he was part of the group that was literally in Venice during the Second World War, and I was like, I'm there now too, and he's always like, how is it now? And it's really weird to have these conversations, but I mean, it's
my
necessary.
friend's dad said to me, you know why you're not a conservative? Because you have nothing to conserve. And I was like, it's true. I don't own anything.
Yeah, I can't imagine not being able to move and like realizing that that's such a privilege. Like, how
Oh,
do you want to take that away from other people if you have that? That's just, I don't know. It's a
well,
weird
the
thing.
weird thing is the people that want to build the wall, they don't go anywhere anyways. They're like, America's number one. Only been to America. It's the greatest place ever in the world. It's the only place I've
That's
ever
but
been.
that's so funny. People say it's the greatest place in the world who've never left the state, and you're like, how can you say that? How?
70%, something like 70% of the world's population believes in angels. I mean,
Well, we had, a lot of Northern Europeans were like, why do we have to give Greece money? And I was like, because you go there every holiday. Like, you profit from all of those things. And then you're like, why are they part of the European Union? Why do I have to give them money? And I'm like, you own your second summer house there. Like, you're part of the problem. And it's baffling. I think it's everywhere.
what's
But,
Belgium?
hmm?
What's Belgium, anyways? That one always throws me off, that country.
I just, I don't know. Good cheese? I don't know. Good white wine, I think. I mean,
Oh my
yeah.
gosh. You know what? It's weird. You know how like, oh God, what? I should not be talking today. I'm like, it's okay to be kind of semi like racy if you're like, it's against white people. Cause I'm always like saying kind of negative things about the Swiss. It's probably not nice. I would
I
say
have to say, but
the art world has
it's so
Swiss
common.
ethics.
What it's very common. Like I think everybody in Europe is a regionalist. Even I am. Like I
Mm.
believe in like cultural specificities of regions, but not nation states. It's very weird. But I'm totally like I'm from the north, and I think people from
Where are
the
you
south are
from?
really stupid.
We're in the
Hamburg,
north.
northern
Hamburg.
Germany. And I
Yes.
honestly believe that people from the south are, a little richer, a little more Catholic, and a little more backwards. It's like the Texas of Germany. It's really funny. So,
Well,
and I know that that's a
you're like the
problem, but
Visigoths.
yeah, I don't know. So where are you at the moment? Are you in
In my
Philadelphia?
in my place where I do all my work, in my little study. Here. Oh, oh, oh. There's a
Well, that
bed.
looks
I'm gonna get
nice.
rid of them. In the corner. That's where I find happiness because that's where I play video games. Except for now my son plays video games. He's encroaching in my world. There's no peace.
That is so
And
nice because my whole place is literally boxes.
I
Because, yeah, moving this weekend. So yours is really nice. I got
got a nice
boxes
pad.
and
I mean,
pads.
I'll say this. Philadelphia, if people say, I don't know much about Philadelphia, it's an affordable place. You can get a really nice house in mixed race neighborhoods. It's almost exotic at this point in the world.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way as a person in the arts that you can afford these supposing art hubs anymore. Like who can live in New York or who can live in London? That's just ridiculous at this point. Like maybe if you're the director, but
Well,
otherwise you end up, I
the
don't know.
European American thing's so weird too because Europeans make terrible salaries,
Yes.
but they get all these benefits.
Yeah.
But for an American going over there, you're like, I make how much at the Tate? $35,000 a year? I'm
Yes.
sorry, what?
Yeah.
Um,
But I mean, all of these bigger cities are not livable. And yet everybody tells you that, you have to live there to be in the arts. And you do in a sense, but I think maybe Corona is a good way around it. Maybe it's more, working from
well,
home,
the arts are
working
just like
remotely.
everything. The truth of it is super annoying because unfortunately, I think you do kind of have to be one of these people that shove your way to the front of the line. Like pushiness helps you in this world. I hate that because I wait in line forever. I can never get a drink at a bar. Um, but I feel like the arts, like all career worlds, it's like you kind of have to shove your way in. You got to be in the mix. It's
I mean,
I always feel
cheap
bad for
bar.
these artists that are like, I just want to make my art. I'm like, that's awesome. You won't do very well, but it's awesome.
Well, then I think it's one of these people that people don't want to talk about it, but a lot of people who are in the arts came into it independently wealthy. You talk to people in their 30s, and then, I'm always like, how do you travel? How do you go to these things? And it turns out eventually, that they have another, outside financial help to fly to Miami. Like as a European, I was always amazed that people go to these places. And then I was very lucky that I made friends and they literally let me crash in their hotel rooms and supported me through that. But us
Totally.
adults, how are you
You're just like
supposed to get
this.
there?
I'm always confused about life because I'm always like, I don't understand. Like, I feel like I did all right. And like, I'd be in New York. I'm like, there's buildings everywhere. And I don't know anyone that owns any of them.
Right?
And
Who
then like
owns an
in the
apartment?
art world, everyone's flying around. There's all this money. Everyone's out partying. No one has to get up for work. What's going on? I'm like,
Yeah, but who are these people? How can you travel and party? And apparently you're working independently. But what? What? I don't know.
all I
I don't
know
know.
is I was an intern at the Art Institute of Chicago, and I got to sit at Oakley Enwizer's desk because he was working on Documenta, and he was a new curator there. And he had plastic around his seat and plastic around his keyboard because he never sat in his chair. And the whole time I was there, I sat in that plastic chair. He never showed up to work. And I thought, whatever this job is, I want this job. What's this curator thing? I like this idea. You don't even show up to work? This is awesome. And the other guy, James Rondeau, who's now the director, he just took old ladies out to lunch all the time.
But I mean, that's how it runs in a sense, I think.
That's how it runs. For some. For,
So,
for the working class folks, I mean, it's not, sometimes it's like, it's useful to know these things, but I don't know. Sometimes it just gets you kind of bummed. And I think it doesn't have to be so depressing because I find so much joy in the arts, actually. You know, and every time I think it's like depressing, dude, try chemical engineering or like, you know, like try web design or like programmer. You know what I mean?
but I
Like,
think that's the good part. Yeah, you do something that you really want to do. So this is a downfall too, because then you're obviously never going to say no. I think I've never said no to anything. When somebody's like, "Hey, can you do this?" But you know, it's kind of for free. I really want to do it, so I end up doing it. But also, I know that I'm perpetuating a system that relies on people loving what they do so much.
I'm a big fan of that, by the way. All this, like, I don't work for free. I'm always like, why not? I have lots of career advice and it's really annoying, but I don't know, it's built up over the years. One of them is if you're going to do something for free, which is a great thing to do, make it the most awesome thing you could do because you could be anything. And I also learned early on, I just put that free stuff on my resume. I'm like, I did it.
In the moment that we had, I think it was just a very funny moment where we realized that thanks to Corona, none of it had something to do. And we were like, let's do a collective. Let's, think about things that we wanted to think about, but there was no space in our projects. And we were very, people do different things. And this is very rare that, you have people you would never work with in a normal, regular job because of geography or schedules. And now I get to talk to people like you and just be like, hey, do you want to talk about these things? So,
if you work for free, you could be like, I want to be a director of museum. You're just like, I promote myself. I'm director of museum. Here we go. I'm doing it.
Start your own thing. Well, I mean, now you're starting an art school. You really are doing this at the moment. So you decided you want to start something new, change something?
Well, so I've moved away from curating. It's also because, like, I don't know. At some point, I just got bored with it. No offense, artists. It was like the group show it all became weird. I was fine. But we started working on this project to build a museum in Philadelphia, and I got really into this kind of like, because like buildings are kind of like public art that sticks around longer, And then, go ahead.
I love the model that you're doing it with, because it's almost like the Kunsthalle, right? You're not collecting, you're not trying to amass this kind of treasure, but you really much think of it as a project space or this Kunsthalle concept where it's really trying to react fast and do new things in the space. Right?
Well, this is what's crazy. Here's the thing. So we start working on this museum, and I'm like, my brain started going crazy because first thing I realized is you don't need art to have a cultural space.
Yeah.
The other thing I realized is the city itself has changed so much. Uber, your phone, co-working spaces, the way people congregate, the Apple Store, the whole way the city's organized has changed. But the museums, I mean, you get a Renzo piano facade, but the interior, the actual museum, mid-19th century, hasn't changed at all. And as we started thinking through things that could be, I was like, oh my God, the ideas around museums have changed, but the platform hasn't. To the point where I was like, you don't even need art in them to work. Like, you could do many things. You could actually just platform different cultural spaces in the city. You could be like a library of cultural space where you just kind of do it and you do. And I'm a big fan of local meets national meets international. I like to always have those gelling. And you can have your snotty art and your local community art. And you can kind of have your cake eating too, but you can do a lot of different things. Because I was thinking like after Amazon has completely eviscerated the retail sector, the kind of fun things that made a city cool, like bookshops or record shops or, whatever, these things, they don't exist anymore. So what now you got? You got like pet supply stores, gyms, so boring. Chase Bank, Chipotle, just crap. Cities are crap. And that thing that, the beginning of the city, Walter Benjamin wrote about it in the Arcades Project, is like, it was kind of window shopping. Well, what do we do now that there's no stores? Well, I think it's a great opportunity for cultural spaces to reinvent the reason to be together in space. And that doesn't have to have paintings. That doesn't have to have video art. That can have all kinds of stuff. People are so literal about art, it drives me crazy. Like you have to have an art show. And also, here's another thing, art shows. How tired is this genre? Label,
Well,
didactic text,
who's
label.
into it? I think that's the other thing. I love how you made this very clear distinction between international, local, national, even public, because I think that was one of the first things that we were interested in. If you look at the numbers who actually goes at these particular biennial things, all people travel there to see it. And so this idea of who feels comfortable in these spaces, you see all of a sudden international exhibitions at a biennial system where all labels are in English exclusively in a country where people don't speak.
But isn't the Venice Biennial extremely popular?
It's extremely popular internationally and to a small part of the
Is it small? I thought they got tons of Italian traffic.
They have huge, particularly within Venice, a really hard standing because it completely changed that neighborhood and completely even changed the structure of the city and how it functions in that sense. So it's crazy because there's often no local representation of any of the artists who work there. It makes it almost impossible for people to have spaces outside of it because, if it's on that rhythm, on the calendar, who's going to, rent something out to a local artist for a few €100 a month if you could rent it for a few thousand? And I think
Venice is such a weird creature, that the Biennale. It always feels like it's very stilted and old, but it's always very heralded and it has that kind of oldie-timey, like, this is the greatest show. But it doesn't, you can't totally buy it. It's got the national pavilions. It feels very quaint. Everyone's got these different governments ponying up for these awkward little events and parties. And also, too, I think a lot of the biennials the curators I've talked to are really interested in reinvesting in the local, trying to have a much more kind of holistic idea around how the economies are shaping the kind of environments. At some point, Venice should do that because it just makes it for a better experience all around.
Yeah, I think there has been a very sharp shift towards that, but it's almost this fetishization when, a lot of these latest had these, little labels of like working with this non-profit local space. And it was this total, like, look, we found the one real Venetian and we dragged him in here and we found him and let's, really have him. Because there's, I think, 200 million visitors a year, tourists, on 200,000 local residents. I think it's one of the extremist places in terms of numbers.
Extreme tourism.
I think particularly short time and daytime tourism. So
that's tough.
The problematic is, I think, became a lot with a shift towards Airbnb to, we see that everywhere. Cheap flights, cheap cruise ships, on the one hand, it democratizes travel.
I'm totally part of the problem. I'm so part of the problem.
I know, I think we all are, but that's a funny thing about the art world, that we love to criticize things that we are part of.
I do think the Venice thing is solvable. I think the Venice thing is solvable. Two things I'll say. One, I'm just off the top of my head. One, I feel like their budgets are really bad. That's just my gut. That Sao Paulo Biennial has a massive education budget, and it's extremely popular in Brazil. Like all kinds of everyday high school kids, elementary school kids go. I think there's lessons to be learned from that in just a general sense. And then also curatorially and kind of administratively, the kind of move to the local actually would make the Venice Biennial far more enjoyable anyways. If you had more, and also a more sustainable approach to like visitorship, to what it is, its reason for being. I think these national pavilion things, it's like, what are we in, like we're like in the 1950 some at the UN here. But it's odd.
It's not fair in the sense of only, criticizing it as an institution, because obviously the city itself is like this synectic view that people have where they enter and they have 2 days of Disneyland and then they exit. So it's just one of the factors in that sense. So I think it's a much larger problem locally there. So I think seeing it sort of as an exemplary case for a lot of European cities, how they function these days with tourism and not just...
See, Munich will never have your problems. Munich will never have your problems because it's totally boring. And oh my gosh, poor Barcelona, man. I was like, just getting slammed.
Yeah.
I know. All right. We're going to talk about nonprofits, right? Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, that was the main thing. I think that was particularly the idea that In the US, I think almost everybody in the cultural sector counts as a non-profit, which I think is
Well,
quite,
not the galleries.
not the galleries, but most institutions. But I think there's a strong rift where on the one hand, everybody, you know, first they hate talking about money, so we are so happy that you joined us because you obviously are very open
I
to
love
that
to
and
talk
very
about
honest,
money.
which I think is incredible. Um,
I don't
but the
understand
other
it at
thing
all.
is, yeah, I think so. Not to shy away from that, because I think we all know that there is a dependency on galleries in a sense, and that there is this ideology surrounding the nonprofit that's somehow better, and then on the other hand, even the academic sort of ivory tower thing. But to really think realistically about the benefits that nonprofits can have for local communities, which you already touched upon a little bit, but also critically, if it's right to always think in these very strong categories and
There probably should be a few other models. You know, I'm getting older, so I always have my suspicions about these anarchist models, although they sometimes work. But, you know, when you hear about things and they never seem to click, you wonder what's going on. Like, because they got like workers' cooperatives and stuff like that. But like, first of all, the nonprofit system, what's peculiar to me is that you have to have a board. Why do you got to have a board?
yeah.
And typically the board is used as people that are wealthy that give money to the institution. And then you have a kind of class interest, but it doesn't always have to be that way. But, you know, as your budgets grow, and I always joke that nonprofits left to their own devices were organizations that raised money for the sake of raising money. Like, they, you know, the only reason they exist is to raise money, and they don't even know. It's just this kind of endless tautology. But the funny thing is we kind of get blinded by this ethics of it's not for profit. And of course, galleries do have a profit. And I will say this, there is a conflict of interest one must note. For instance, I always cracked up that most of the art magazines have ad space to galleries, and then they're going to write reviews. It's like, what? It's like if you had an energy magazine sponsored by Exxon and they're going to review the gas companies. You're like, well, okay, good luck. But I think, you know, but the art world is, because its money is so tied up in the art market, it has swallowed so much painful contradiction constantly. But I think it's also blinded a lot of organizations to other kinds of ways to survive. Because when I found out, like, the organization Ashgal Al-Wan is a nonprofit, they're in Beirut. I think Parasite in Hong Kong is a nonprofit, but a lot of them are nonprofits around the world. And at least in the United States, you get a tax credit and there's a culture of philanthropy. Some of these places, they're a nonprofit, no one even gives to them. So it doesn't even make sense. And then in your land, you got all the state stuff. So it's like, especially Germany and the Netherlands and Scandinavia, everyone just sits around and waits for their grant and complains about it. And the state kind of runs things, which has its own, it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's a completely different system here. We don't have, I think we rely a lot less on private donors. There's a lot more state funding. But I think that it's, you know, you're always going to need money. And I think it's this very weird topic where either it's going to come from the state, obviously, and then, you know, there is a political agenda at one point or another. Not to say that there always is, but in theory, you're dependent on a state. On a private, if it's private money, that means, you know, you take money from one person. While, why does one person have that much money? I know, I'm always
the world is big, man. People got money all over the place. It's crazy. The thing I've noticed with these state-sponsored things is, like, those bureaucracies. Bureaucracy has a feel to it sometimes, and it's hard to kind of keep it quick and fresh with giant state-funded things. I'm just saying, I like them. That's why there's so many biennials in Europe, because the state sponsors these things. There's no biennials in America because there's no state to sponsor them.
But it's really funny because whenever, you know, people talk about state money being very inclusive, you look at what you need to do to get it, and that level of language that's required requires a certain level of education. You know, who goes and gets a master PhD to write that well? You know, there's all these layers, obviously, that there's always going to be a bias. Like, there's always, I don't want to say an exclusive factor, but I think talking about very open spaces in art, not talking about money is a privilege itself. So I love that when last time we chatted, you said, you know, why isn't there a gallery that sells pizza? And then the surplus of the pizza goes
like,
into
look at Venice. It's so
non-profit.
funny. It's like artists, as innovative as they are, only can think of two systems for, like, organizing stuff. And I was like, you know, you look around the city, there's like, I got a guy in the Italian market literally sells cardboard boxes with, like, writing on them. I don't know who buys this stuff, but But there's all kinds of ways that people produce revenue streams. Look at all this online stuff. And I'm not a big fan of selling and making money. It's not that. But I was really influenced by this guy, this group. It's called DC Hardcore. It's a punk rock movement out of DC in like late 70s, early 80s. It was really simple. It's just like you support the label, the music label, by paying $5 for an album. And everybody understood the way the money circulated. And I did this event in DC called the Creative Time Summit when I was at this organization, Creative Time. And it's like a gathering of artists and activists. And this guy, Ian MacKaye, who was like the main guy of this movement, he had a band called Minor Threat and Fugazi and a label called Discord Records. He said to me, how much does it cost to go to this thing? And I said, it's free. And he goes, I don't trust free. He goes, someone's paying. What is it? He goes, you know, when we did the record label, you understood, $5 went here. This is how much money it took to print the record. It was all very clear. And it kept the machine going. Artists got paid. And that kind of economy makes a lot of sense to me in a very simple way, because we can all chip in. You know, we can all put our dollars. You know, people complain about ticket prices. People buy beer all the time. It's so expensive. You know, you could buy art beer.
Yeah, have nice labels. I think, yeah, a friend of mine used to say, if something's free, you're the product. I think it's very funny in the sense that either, you know, they need, as particularly if you're artists, you know, they need you to sort of, it's almost like the status quo to work with these people and to build this like culture institution.
We've done this for you. You're like, this is really awkward. Like, I was just walking by. These artists are like, it's free. You can do whatever you want. It's totally open. And all these people are like, I'm just gonna keep walking. It's okay. But I do like free. I'm sympathetic to free. I like free. I'm gonna hold for free. But I think people are like either free or capitalist. I think there's a lot of gray area in between.
Yeah, because otherwise, you know, in the moment that you say nonprofit, it all of a sudden, you know, justifies very low wages, or it justifies not paying artists. You know, a lot of vinyls don't pay artists. A lot of vinyls rely on international 20-year-olds who just finished their bachelor's to, you know, look beautiful in galleries while standing there, and outsourcing those long-term jobs in a sense. So I think it's this very strange model that almost justifies a lot of its own downfalls. And I think
it's so funny too. Isn't the art world so funny? Like these biennials, all these shows, all this art on the wall. Sometimes I think, shouldn't we just kind of scrap it all for now and just start over? Like, because it just seems so silly. Like, I always thought the arts was this place you could do anything you wanted. You could try anything. I remember I went to that Archer's Mievsky Berlin biennial, and everyone said it's a disaster. And it really was, but I liked it because at least it was a disaster. It was trying something, you know? I feel like a lot of the, like, I don't know. It's been a long time since I've seen a show that really like made me feel like, whoa, we're, you know, like what the
because
fuck?
I think part of it is weirdly almost this like idea of preservation, an idea of, I mean, it comes into place with cities, with collections, with we build this idea of what something should look like, particularly within culture, and we sort of box it and put it in an institution, and that prevents that culture from moving forward. And I think that museums itself were built as, you know, these collecting institutions that really were supposed to educate people on high culture in a very biased way, as, you know, everybody's talking about. But it also, you know, prevented us from almost, you know, knocking down that bottle in a sense. And I think it's almost its own downfall, because it has this weird paradox that, yes, it pretends to move society forward, but it's always preserving. You can't talk about something that's happening now. Even with Corona, so many art institutions try to sort of react right away, but how are you supposed to deal with something that you don't know how it's going to end? I think it's this very
I think the big collecting institutions just should stay old. Just stay old, because I don't know what to do with them right now. Yeah, I'll tell you, it's tough to keep up, but I was thinking, like, I mean, they are so in the past. I don't, and it's because they're supposed to be, but well, you know, whatever. I mean, like the Philadelphia Museum of Art, they should have been collecting black art a long time ago. It's a black city, for God's sake.
Yeah,
you know,
society is changing faster than art at this point. And I think it's this very weird thing.
The city's changing faster than art. I mean, that's the crazy thing. I feel like art is not nearly as fast as the city. And, you know, like the way people, that's what I was thinking, like, actually what is culture doesn't have to be art. You know what I mean?
Well,
Like, I'm just like where the
defines
action's
what
at.
it is, yeah.
Like, if action
But
ain't in the art, I'm out.
do you
Sometimes it's
think
in
that
art.
there can be an institution within a neighborhood that doesn't lead to sort of, let's say gentrification, the typical G or whatever?
Sure.
Is
Sure.
that
I mean,
possible out within a space that doesn't?
you just have to be somewhat macro about it. I mean, you can't change the global currents by which cities are changing their composition and economies are changing. That you can't do, but certainly you can, collaborate with low income housing. You could put rent control into shape. You can actually have a housing plan as part of a cultural institution plan.
Yeah.
You know, I was thinking like you can do all kinds of things. Like you could do, I was looking in Chicago, they have a library that's part library, part public housing. And I was thinking, man, you could do part library, part public housing, part museum, part Prada store. You know, I went to Medellin, and there was like they put a lot of money. They kind of made this plan. I don't know the mayor. Look at me. This isn't me riffing. Basically, the mayor, whoever he was, decided that the way to stop violence was to go after poverty. And so they put a lot of their infrastructure dollars into the poorest neighborhoods in the city. And so they have these remarkable social centers that like do workshops for women how to take care of their kids. They do health programs. They also have art galleries, movie cinemas. They have recreational facilities. They're really in these high-end architectural things. And then they also have these beautiful escalators that go up into the favelas. And it's like, it's cake and eat it too. It's like it's doing all these things that people don't think are possible, but it's totally possible.
Yeah, there's a similar project. I think it was called acupuncture architecture. It was really interesting where they would only, acupuncture architecture, where they
I've
would
heard of
only
this.
revitalize like certain areas in these neighborhoods,
Mm-hmm.
very controlled, like a community center or a few shops, corner buildings, and through giving spaces within those neighborhoods, small parks, small centers, the whole sort of dynamic changed. But they were very careful not to go in and drop some huge stores or something. Made very sure that it was rent controlled and that would be tailored to its people who already live there, instead of bringing in these other businesses to sort of take over, and was super successful, super
Oh, that's
interesting.
cool. I mean, I actually feel like all these kind of art activist proposal things that I totally love. The funny thing is, I realized these ideas, do you remember when they had the bikes, like just share a bike thing? They're all over the cities. And I was like, that's an anarchist thing. Now it's just popular. And I was thinking, there's a lot of these things that come out of like art activist land, sometimes just activist land, that I'm like, these aren't just like proposals for what if, these should just be done. For example, like in America right now, we're dealing with the March for Black Lives, and there's all this police brutality. I was like, when will it end? I was like, in my mind, I'm like, there's one way that would really help, and that is ununionizing defunding the police force, taking those dollars and putting recreational things, sociologists, like rethinking police in general. That's not a crazy idea. It's an idea way past due.
I mean, I don't have a driver's license, and when I was 18, I moved to Kansas City, which was extreme. And I
Kansas
lived
City,
in a
Missouri?
suburb. Yeah. So I lived in a
I love
suburb
that.
called Overland Park, and I just, very naively moved there. And I was like, okay, great. I'm going to find something to do. I don't have a driver's license, and there goes one bus, and it's a one-way bus. So you
Oh
can
my
go
God.
from the suburb at 7 in the morning into the city, but you can walk home, I think it's 3 hours. It's ridiculous. And I remember I had this total culture shock where I came from, somewhere where you can, somehow take a bus almost everywhere. You walk or you bike.
Yeah.
And I could not leave the house. And I remember thinking, what if, I can't afford a car. That means that was out, I'm completely excluded from society. I'm unable to find a job. It's ridiculous that there's no way for somebody who can't afford to live in the city to actually go inside the city for a job. And that just these
Oh my
small
God.
things.
Don't get me started. I live in Philly. I worked
Insane.
in New York City for 10 years. I spent $148,000 on Amtrak in 10 years. What?
Just,
What?
yeah, would be
What?
cheaper not to work.
That is
But
insane. That is
talking about
insane.
projects working in the city, I don't know if Emily Jasir is still on the call. I think I saw her earlier. Thanks for joining. And I
Hello,
remember that,
Emily Jasir.
is she still on the call? Maybe she dropped us.
He's like, I'm out of here. Yes, Medellin. Oh, right on. Cool. I see this. Many times free means someone's labor not being paid. Hey, I'm going to say this about the labor thing for a second, though. I got to get on this.
Yeah.
You know, when everyone's like, I need to get paid, my labor. I'm always like, well, sometimes there's just no money to pay you. Like when everyone's like, you know, when they were unionizing a lot of these nonprofits, I'm like, it's good to unionize them, but they ain't got no money. You know, a lot of the mid-level ones, like they're organized poorly. I mean, I'm all for people getting fair wages, but they'd have to completely reinvent their economic system, which they should do.
Yeah, but that's, you know, it comes back to it. But I wanted to drop back to sort of art project within the city, because talking about Venice and Emily's project that she did in with the Stazione.
I remember.
It was one of the most, I mean, it obviously didn't happen, but the way it was set up would have been one of the most incredible, because it's in the city. It would have been on one of the most visible things to locals that they use in their daily life, while completely questioning part of the history that's always so sort of one-lined or one-dimensionally told. To maybe give some context to that, her project Stazione was meant to have an Arabic translation of the Vaporetto, which is the water bus stations within the city, into Arabic, to sort of highlight how closely aligned both cultures are, in that, in a sense, you know, Venetian culture is hybrid. Because
what was it, Emily? Was it canceled because they were like, Arabic incites terrorism or something outrageous?
Well, there's a very clear, I don't want to say politic behind it, but there is, you know, Gregor Schneider's project was the Black Cube. He wanted to
remember that.
Black Cube. I mean, obviously that was very extreme, but it also, the main reason was that people were scared it would, you know, look like
bombs. Everyone's gonna bomb
Mecca
things.
in a sense, or you know, the church that got like, there's a lot of these precedents that sort of show the construction of history and how it works. And the moment that you take it outside of an institution and want to have it in the city with people who live there, people get very nervous about it, and it was very clearly sort of shut down in a sense. So
Jonas Dahlberg, he had a project that got shut down too. Look at this. We got all kinds of people whose projects have been shut down. Sorry. It happens. It happens out there.
Yeah, it's a very
well, you know, I'll say this about infrastructure. You know, I think that America doesn't have one, but I'm a big fan. So this school that I'm starting, you know, the alternative arts school, I really do. I kind of changed my job title. I'm somewhat joking, but not, to infrastructure builder. And it's funny because my first book, Seeing Power, I actually wrote about infrastructures of resonance. And I was kind of saying that the gears under which an institution's formed is actually the kind of tuning fork by which you could speak to other kind of things. And I don't know, you know, I've been in the art world long enough where I was like, I've been in here a long time, and the major pieces of this thing are not put together by people I would want putting it together. Yeah. And I've just felt like the values aren't reflected in our infrastructure. And that's just shame on us. You know, like these art, you know, the auction houses make so much money, right? Yeah. So much money. My world of the arts is everyone's broke. And then in my mind, I'm like, that's our money. You know?
I think, yeah, I mean, auction houses are certainly the extreme, because they have they don't pay anything back. There's no working relationship with artists that
but we could get it. You can go get it. It's there for the taking. I mean, like, and we can build other infrastructures. We don't have to accept theirs. You know, it's just so funny. Like, I mean, I'm all for like criticizing institutions, but at some point I was thinking, how is there not an artist-run museum in America? Like, how does that not exist?
Because people who are creative within that field, I think, are so bad at organizing. I think that's just very
dude,
weird.
That is so true.
The whole, where it's, you know, whenever I'm at, I love working with, you know, very much like grassroots, and all of our partners in Venice are these local institutions who are absolutely adore. But it's hard, because if you have one director who's very overpaid and who works with a board, he's going to say what's happening. If you have 30 people in the room, there's going to be 30 opinions in a room, and you're all equal in the sense. And it's extreme.
Oh my God, I think I did art activism so long that like I'm not going to join any group, because it's like 1 million meetings, and because they're artists, everybody's got to problematize something. And I was like, I don't agree with that point. In fact, I tell you why I'm leaving the group right now. And you're like, here we go. Okay, everyone's leaving the group that didn't even form yet. Okay, good, good. It's amazing any groups stay together. For example, there was that Gulf Labor that was really pushing against the Guggenheim. Man, that was held together. That group went through so much stress. I
was amazed though that that happened and that it happened with from the Guggenheim and that they sort of allowed that, because I think that was, I mean, obviously that's one of the key things, how, you know, art institutions pretend to be this very white, beautiful things, and then they build buildings with, you know, modern day slavery. And
yeah.
how does that ever work together? And the Guggenheim in Venice is also maybe one of the strongest factors there, that even though now they've started reaching out and they work with local communities, yet, you know, they bring
It's so
knowledge
funny that it's like
because
this. They work with local
extremely
communities. They
expensive.
still use slave labor, but they work with locals. It kind of reminds me of, like, do you remember that singer from U2, Bono, where he would be like doing this promotion with Gap to like help the AIDS crisis in Africa? And I was like, so twisted. You're like using sweatshop labor to like
Yes.
solve AIDS in Africa. My brain just explodes with these things. But nevertheless, the world is very complicated, I must say. You know, I do think we've reached some sort of zenith with petitions against things at this point. Like, it's like, you know, it just seemed like it's a good time to build during the COVID time. You know, I think that's a good call.
It's nice because people in the arts love hating things, and I think it's very difficult usually to actually put something out there and not be so terrified of the criticism that you don't actually do something. And I think somehow collective work has been so, like, everybody goes crazy over it because they were so lonely during lockdown that everybody wants to work collectively and just wants to do something. And it's kind of amazing how that impacted, I think, how people see it and how much less competitive they are, in the sense that
Totally.
everybody's just happy to do something together.
I always want to have an awards ceremony for all the things that never get awards. Like, I love administrators because I've worked on behind the scenes, and you know, people be like, oh, administrators. I'm like, I want an administrators award for great administrators.
I want a guard award.
The guard
I started
award.
out working as a guard all through my undergrad, and you only get asked when they close and where the restrooms, and if they can touch things.
It's
and
a weird job.
Museum, they're invisible. It's incredible. People don't even say hi. It's like the invisible labor. It's so weird. It's one of these.
I don't want to step on a problem here, but couldn't there be a better way to make that job? It just seems, just by the nature of it, a little tedious.
Yeah, it's tough. Also standing for like 10
and
hours.
I'm always feeling bad. I'm like, oh man, it's so quiet.
But even there, you know, even there you have people say, you know, it's these like experiences, or like I've seen that in so many institutions now who call it a work experience or something, and then you have these like 20-year-olds stand there. And I know that even in Venice, a lot of people were let go with that shift, and it was people who worked as a guard for 30 years. Like, that's a
30.
job for people.
My uncle's been a security guard at Cal Arts for almost that time and still uses a cassette Walkman as he travels the halls, I must say.
But it's amazing. They know everything. I think it's, you know, it's these like weird, beautiful social spaces that actually make it something amazing. And you can't, I mean, yeah, you could probably also, I think cameras, drones, I can see drones, but.
Dude. So, okay, here's a thought. Let's make a new business for Venice. Here's some things to think about. One, climate is real and Venice is sinking. Venice is an example of a lot, and it's not just art. You know, I keep thinking like how you should have in every city some towering example of how we're going to stop climate change or we're going to reverse this trend. You should be able to look out from your window and see the thing right now and be like, that thing is showing us the way. And Venice should be showing us the way.
But you don't have to show Venetians that it's happening. I think it's more of a problem of, you know, the rest of the world acknowledging
No, but showing, not just showing it's happening, but showing the solution to it. Like zero, you know, like negative carbon emission, like make the biennial negative carbon emission, you know, make the vaporettos, I don't even know.
Electric vaporettos would be great, or solar power.
Yeah, and or locally driven.
Funny enough, there's so many incredible like small artist group working on it, and it's very interesting because I think the solutions, sort of that alternative view on problems like that, are often really interesting because they're not, you know, if you ask a mechanical engineer, he's going to say, let's build a dam, which they tried and it spectacularly failed, the Moses project. So I think it's quite interesting when you ask people who aren't sort of these super realistic, but more of a come around in common curves. I think that could be an amazing biennial to actually look into that and to think about that and use all the resources used for an art exhibition that people fly in to see, and instead, you know, have one that's actually themed after the city and come up with, you know, use all of these resources forward just for 1 year. Like
Well, I know that like
that.
Sally Tulane at Queens Museum, no, not Queens Museum, sorry, at the Liverpool Biennial. Over time, the biennial was kind of changing the composition of Liverpool to use the resources to actually make infrastructural changes to the city, because you put money into it, might as well do something with it. I mean, you know, if there was a more intentional use of the kind of resources of biennial budgets in general, and they're not all the same. I mean, I'm sure there are some that do that. I think it would be very helpful. You know, certainly there's ways in which you could actually galvanize those resources to being more ecologically holistic. Yeah, what's his name? Marco Baravale, that does takes the crates that they throw out, right?
Yeah. I think there's also one of the great examples for, you know, a local space that still works with international, with the Silent Dogs. They do incredible projects, but they're very clear on who they're
Well, that's also because he's so handsome.
Yeah, I mean, I would.
When you look like that, people are just gonna do what you need. I'm just saying. He walks in the room. My wife was like, "Who is that?" I was like, "That's Marco Baravale, man. That is one charming man."
Confusing moment in your life.
I'm just gonna do some theoretical stuff, but I'm also recycling crates because I'm into the environment. You're just like,
and have a perfect space. Yeah.
Good night. Mic drop. But you know, I was thinking too. Okay, let's have more fun. So I was thinking. I do think. I'll just be clear. I do think the auction house. Someone should go after the auction houses and actually make auction houses that give money to an equitable art world.
Well, make your own auction houses, because they need so much less infrastructures than you do as a gallery. But then, you know, do it almost like a gallery auction house where you support your people, but you have that kind of model. I don't know. But I think this is an amazing moment to rethink these structures. And I think
the artists have a lot of power. They don't. So, for example, the Abu Dhabi Guggenheim thing, I was there when they cracked the code on that. And that was in this event called Homeworks in Beirut, held by Ashgal Alwan. And the funny thing about that moment was they're building Abu Dhabi Guggenheim, and it's clear that most of the kind of blue chip Mideast artists of the region were in the room. And you couldn't build a collection without these people's buy-in.
Yeah.
And so, like, I don't know who's like Shirin Nishad or Waleed Raj, you know, like they have to be on board. Emily Jasir. So if they're not on board, suddenly you have leverage. And you know, the arts haven't been very good at leveraging their leverage, but it is a tool that could be used.
I'm always saying that about the American education system. When I first started uni in Germany, they tried to have tuition, which was 500 euros for a semester, which I know it doesn't sound much. And then students wouldn't go for months, and now we are free again. There's no tuition. And I know that's an extreme example because it's completely different, but I think, but it comes back to the idea that you have to be able to obviously like unionize and make it one movement, and that's extremely hard because people who are interested in revolutionizing something, they're often also very difficult to work with and organize. And it's just,
oh, so funny when we did
strong enough.
When we were doing the alternative art school, I was like, kind of had this back in my mind, like people are gonna be like, what's the alternative about a marketplace art school? Like, it's not alternative, it's just called a business. But and I was like, I don't know. But I was thinking, you know, I've just become very charmed by the need for revenue streams intentionally reallocated. So we take American dollars and then we're going to pay for artists of other regions to attend, you know. And I was thinking about like global platforms to be more intentional about the economies of different regions and resourcing them to support the global South, for example, you know, or to be like, to not shy away from the money, you know. And then also too, I think
that's the point where I'm landing, where I'm like, I want to be financially independent enough that I can make sure that everybody within my field that I want to work with is getting paid. So if I do a project, I'm trying to get there, and if that means that I come up with a funding model where I sell something or a business model, I think that's amazing, and I think that has to be a skill that people in the art world learn and
I'll tell you one thing though.
prioritize.
I hope to be
Because
able to
otherwise
pay
you're never
people great
independent.
wages. I can't even pay myself right now. I'm like, but I think like some of these galleries make a ton of dough, but a lot of them don't. When you're saying that thing about like the art world's full of all these rich people and you don't know it. Do you know how much of the art world is just vanity projects? Like there's no economy there, like there's just.
Yeah, but that's a funny thing. But stuff looks like money, and we only like in the moment that there's a finished object, we can somehow value that, and then there's something real coming out of it. But all the art practices that don't have that, like how do you value that? And there's societies literally baffled by it because they're like, well, if I have something that's in my hand, I know maybe I can overprice that, but it leads also to this very one-dimensional way of how you can value things in a sense. So
Oh man. Well, I've always found it tricky because I'm a working class guy. When your friend tries to sell you some art and you're like, $400? What?
yes.
Oh my God, it's so expensive, and it's just like you just feel like, oh, and then your friend's like, I can't sell you this art. I can't sell you this. So it's just funny because those economies of scale are so tricky, and but at the same time too, I always think like the vanity world, you can totally like all that part of the art world that's all like just money and it's kind of fake. You can totally tell it's fake. It feels fake.
I mean,
I've seen cities change. Like I remember like in New York City, there's a space, 16 Beavers, like 8 kids that hung out and talked theory all the time, once every Monday for like 10 years or something. Dude, they changed New York's art scene, and in Chicago, this group Temporary Services, 3 really hardworking, kind of aggressive artists changed the city, and with no money, just like sheer, and also like really going for it.
but that means that you have to be in a city where that's possible. I think that was one of the big attractions to Berlin for such a long time.
Yeah.
You could be a part-time barista / bouncer / something else and have an art practice. Because if your rent is, let's say, I think my room there was 290 euros a month. I could do almost anything or nothing because there was no financial pressure. If my room alone is, I don't know, 1,200, 2,000, what are the odds of me, taking the time to actually do something and have come up with something that I'm happy with?
I'm glad you brought this up.
Whatever's there.
Well, this is what's blowing my mind away with this alternative art school online, which is just a basic internet thing, which is, so in Philadelphia, you have Philadelphia artists, and like a lot of cities, they do the 3 places that do shows, and then that's it for Philly. Their whole life, they've done all the work in Philly. But most cities are like this. And I always say Philly artists, the last place they need to show is Philly. They need to get out. But the same is, that's kind of most cities in the world. And then I was thinking about the online platform that we can actually, the periphery can connect to these kind of interesting alternative spaces in Hong Kong, in Sao Paulo, in Chicago, in Melbourne. You can actually meet the people, you can be connected, you can still pay affordable house prices. You don't have to be in a hubbub. There's a certain, it's not there yet, but I feel like there's this really interesting, so much of the arts has been shaped by the condition of urbanism and global city centers. And if this internet thing allows some porosity and change and a cultural exchange where you can be connected but still have a studio space, dude, that's crazy.
I like where you're coming from, but I think also everybody gets so excited about it during this lockdown. The internet is also so biased. Like it's very, who actually has access to it? Who has high-speed internet? Which generation are you from? I do think that people very rarely like acknowledge how biased even these platforms like Instagram is predominantly used in, let's say, people from 15 to 50 who are in the West because there it's possible to access it. I think.
But I would say those numbers of bias,
there is.
I agree with you, but it is shrinking. Like almost everyone's got a phone at this point. Like I was
Yes,
talking
yeah,
to a dude in Accra. I've been talking to people in Mozambique. That bandwidth is getting better. I mean, it wasn't that
yeah,
long ago. You couldn't talk to people in the global south very well. You can now. And I think that, I mean, I don't think I think these kind of things are changing. And what's also wild is that the idea of the local, when people are like, let's talk to the community, what they really mean are the people that are kind of locally bound by geography. They're not talking about the international travelers. They're talking about people that have accents that actually are from a place in a neighborhood and generally have a class relationship to it. Well, you can make different kind of localisms get into contact with other localisms. You know, the kind of conflation of space is possible. And that kind of, I don't know, my mind is really blown about this kind of collapse of space as it implies a certain kind of condition of politics. One other thing I'll say. So American politics, people think it's Republican, Democrat, but if you actually look at it, it's urban, suburban, rural. And it is entirely geographically produced. If you can shift that in terms of the way people's subjectivity is produced, because basically what that says is people vote based on who they're around. Because people like to get along. It's hard to live somewhere if you're a pain in the ass all the time.
yeah.
So if you're in the countryside, you just go Republican, fine. City, Democrat, fine.
It's the same in, yeah, Eastern Germany. Everybody there votes like, you know, not everybody, but there's a much stronger right-wing party there than there is. But I think it's also in the sense if you're not exposed to a lot of different things, it's a lot easier to tell you what's, you know, the right thing because you just don't see so much more variety. I think without, but even, you know, even the internet is a complete echo chamber. So I think to break those sort of algorithm where we always see what we want to see because, you know, we clicked on it for the first time is almost impossible because you have to know what you're looking for to find it. So
Yeah, I stopped getting I
I
don't do Facebook anymore because I was like, I actually don't know what's going on that thing anymore. And then I just look at the Guardian, New York Times, but it is funny because, like, for example, I have an in-law who sent a post of like Joe Biden being really creepy with a kid because there's all this like pedophilia stuff being accused over there with this group QAnon. But it's like such internet like trash that's circulating as news, you know, but it's really effective. And I was like, oh my gosh, Maggie, that you're just circulating
know what you
trash.
question. I think you have to acknowledge your own bias to know that you can question something, and that's almost impossible if you're surrounded people believing the same thing. You know, I know that I'm quintessential biased due to my upbringing and my media consumption and the things that I can see, and that, you know, that's my bubble, and it's probably as small as any other. I think we're running out of time though, so we have like
Oh,
half a
well,
minute.
we're just
Like
kind of
little after
16 Beaver's
which
still
is
going.
amazing though.
Oh, that's so funny. Vic Vanderpool said 16 Beaver is still doing it. Of course they are. You know, I have a really funny thing about 16 Beaver guys. So they like talking. My friends Renee and Irene love to talk. In fact, I think they did a project at Documenta called and, which said everything. And so I forget what it was, but the way they would do these discussions is they would just talk until no one could talk anymore. So literally people would be sleeping on the floor. Like, I think Niels Norman was just like, but it's a good group. Oh my God, 16 Beaver. Oh, and that's Vic Vanderpool. I love them. There's good people in here. That's cool. How cute is the internet? I really like the internet. Hi, Ian Friday. I like it, but it also hurts me. The haters. Oof. Have you ever had the haters come at you?
Very strange. I don't ever see that, but I see a lot of people all agreeing with each other on something that's very wrong. And I think it's so much more dangerous that there's actually everybody thinks it's free space, but it's the opposite. You just hear what you want to hear constantly, and it's really dangerous because people go into these rabbit holes.
Oh my God. I got accused of being a Zionist, and all these people are like, Palestinians' rights, Palestinians. I was like, yeah, I know. Hello. And then one time I was talking about like with Christopher Columbus. I was like, Christopher Columbus, you know, some of the Italian people here, they just don't like being told what to do by other people. And it was like, Christopher Columbus was a genocidal maniac. I was like, I know. Jeez, internet.
All right. Thank
Get
you
some
so
nuance,
much for joining us.
internet.
Thanks for taking the time.
So we'll do part 2 in an hour?
Obviously, and we talk as long as we